I really want to get you primed and thinking about yourselves as leaders. You are, obviously, by role, by definition, you are leaders. You and your colleagues who were here a month ago, you are driving this company. Individually, you are driving this company. Collectively, you're driving this company. But you might be wondering, hey, why is she having us focus on what's good about us, on our strengths? Why isn't she going for, those things we need to work on? And obviously, we all have things we need to work on. We'll even talk about it a little bit later. But here's a little secret, and this is relevant to you, and it's relevant to how you develop people. When we focus on our strengths, it frankly affects our brains, our brain chemistry. When we think about positive things like who helped us become who we are, the talents and strengths that we bring to anything, including this thing called leadership, we feel good. We feel encouraged. We feel optimistic. We feel excited. We feel confident. And when we feel that way, literally, when our emotions are in the positive register, our brains work better. We are more open. We take in more information, which means we make better decisions. We're more creative. We're more innovative, and etc. So if you want to develop people, which of course you do, and yourself, one of the best ways to start and to carry on, frankly, is to focus on your strengths. You're not only going to shift your brain chemistry, you're going to give yourself energy and resilience for those, those big hurdles when you're up against something that you really need to change or develop. Focusing on our strengths is very, very powerful. There's a whole industry around it, strengths finders and all of that. I'm sure you've heard about it. Well, there's brain science behind it. So that's number one. Number two, you're probably wondering, well, why is she talking about all this emotion stuff, right? Emotional intelligence. What is that anyway? And honestly, I and my colleagues and quite a number of people around the globe now have been studying this thing called emotional intelligence for 2, 3, probably 4 decades, depending on how you count it. And it started in cognitive sciences, and it went to psychology, and very quickly was taken up in the management realm. And that's because we started to figure out what the link between emotion and cognition or thinking and behavior are. What are those links? Well, they're not exactly linear, but they're pretty close. We know that our emotions impact our thinking, our capacity to think, and that those two things in turn, our emotions, moods, and our thoughts impact what we do. It's obvious, right? So we in the management sciences, we're jumping on that back in the 90s saying, okay, what does this have to do with management and leadership? And started doing a lot of studies. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But I do want to dispel a myth about emotional intelligence. Sometimes people think, oh, that means I have to be nice all the time. Well, nobody's nice all the time, number one. And number two, that's not what it means. Emotional intelligence is the capacity to use one's own and others' feelings, moods, and emotions to move us to understand problems better, to be more creative, to think more clearly, and to engage with each other more effectively to get things done. There's a business case behind this thing called emotional intelligence that now 2 decades in is very, very strong. In fact, EI, emotional intelligence, accounts for the vast difference between excellent managers and their more average counterparts. Who wants to be average, right? Not me. And that, in turn, accounts for the kind of cultures that are created. Emotionally intelligent leaders and managers create great cultures around them and the team and around them in the organization. And combination of great leadership and great culture, that's what gets results. You've all heard that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, or however it goes. Well, it's really true. You can have the best strategy in the world, and if your culture is not driving people to be their very best, that strategy is not even worth the paper it's printed on or the computer it sits on. So this is why it's really important to think about this stuff, not just because it feels good or it's nice to think about our strengths, but because when we focus on our emotional intelligence, when we focus on developing developing ourselves and others, we're moving our businesses. We're moving our own individual success, but we're also moving our businesses. So let me talk a little bit about more about why this is important and where do we go wrong on this. It's really one of those things you learned in kindergarten, know yourself, manage your emotions, understand other people, and you'll probably do pretty well. We needed 3 decades of research to say that, right? Apparently we do, because we're busting open a lot of myths. I'm fully in the camp of believing that most people in most organizations want to be good managers and want to be good leaders. I haven't met very many people who get up in the morning and rub their hands together in glee thinking about making people miserable when they come to work. I did work for that guy once. No kidding, and we'll come to that in a second. But most people, with the exception of a few sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever they are, most of us really want to get up and come to work and do well by the people who depend on us and help the people who rely on us for guidance and rely on us to get things out of their way and to help them do their jobs. So why then are there so few really good managers in our organization? And this is a sad fact. This is truly a sad fact, and there are a lot of studies that bear this out. Most managers from the supervisory level all the way up to the C-suite are not as good as they could be. Most of them, frankly, fall in that famous bell curve, right in that big hump in the middle called average. And back to the beginning of my talk, if we are living in a world that is unlike the world we grew up in, and frankly, if we're on this curve like this with technology and the rate and pace of change are going to increase rather than decrease, we cannot settle for average anymore. We absolutely can't. We've got to figure out how to blow up that bell curve and get us all, frankly, over to the high-performing side of a curve. It won't be a bell curve anymore. And what that means is we've got to really look at why. Why are most people average when it comes to management and leadership? And I've spent a lot of time talking with people studying this, and I just want to share a few of the insights that I've come to over the years about the myths that drive us toward mediocrity in this thing called management. Number one, being smart is good enough. If you know your business, you're a great mathematician, you understand the market, your business acumen skills, whatever function you're in, you've nailed it. That's enough. Well, you would kind of think it's enough. That's how we measure ourselves from school age all the way up through our organizations and into our organizations and our careers. Individual success, nail that test, be top of the class, get those A's, do well, get into a good college, get that first good job, be the best in your team, all of that. And I'm not knocking it. We do need to be smart. You can't deal with the world we're living in if you're not smart. But smart just gets you in the door. Smart just gets you in the door. And I'm going to go back and talk about this even more in a second. Myth number 2. Feelings don't matter. Leave that stuff at home. That's for personal life. That doesn't belong in the workplace. Well, that's just silly, frankly. It's garbage. We are emotional beings. We are emotional beings. We bring our brilliance and we bring our feelings with us wherever we go. So learning how to manage them so that they are helping the group as opposed to harming the group is really important. Third myth, and I'm going to talk about all 3 of these a little bit, is that great leaders are tough enough to take anything the world dishes out. So what about that big curve? So what about all that change? So what about that failure I just experienced? So what about and on and on. The reality is we're working in a world where honestly, we could work all the time, and we will, frankly, have a lot of if not failures, situations that we don't understand. And it's easy over time to get sort of beaten down. And if we don't learn how to take care of ourselves, we can find ourselves burning up and burning out just when we need to be at our best, at our smartest, and at our most emotionally intelligent. So let me dive into each one of these, and then I'm going to take you into another exercise in a few minutes. So what we know from, again, I'm quoting studies here. If you need hard evidence, read up on it. We're going to, I think, give you a whole bunch of articles that you can draw on with some links and stuff like that. Emotional intelligence, when you compare emotional intelligence competencies like emotional self-awareness, adaptability, achievement orientation, emotional self-control, empathy, those kind of things, when you compare those competencies with knowledge and skills related to business acumen, cognitive abilities, and things like that, EI far outweighs cognitive competencies and knowledge when it comes to succeeding as a manager or as a leader. And that's hard studies that are telling us that. And as I mentioned before, great leadership is colored by emotional intelligence, and that in turn allows us to create great cultures which allow people to be at their best. There's a strong, strong case for it. In particular, we want to look at a few of these competencies, and you're, I'm sure, exposed to a lot of this in your business environment. Maybe you've even had classes and things like that, but I want to point out a couple of them. If you're thinking, okay, well, what should I focus on as a manager or as a leader? What would really give me the greatest bang for my buck if I really want to improve this thing called emotional intelligence? And honestly, it all starts with self-awareness. You've got to know yourself. You've got to understand what drives you. You've got to understand your values. You've got to understand your line in the sand, that line that you will not cross. Because in an unpredictable world, you're always going to be right on the edge of that line, and you have to know. You have to know. If you don't know, or if you ignore it, which is more common than not knowing, by the way, we usually know where that line is, but sometimes we kind of slip over it. You can find yourself in big, big trouble. 2008, there is no question in my mind, because I was working in the world of finance and other industries at the time, there were a lot of people who made small compromises that any one of which didn't feel too bad added up a great, big, huge deal for the entire world. So self-awareness. Emotional self-control, understanding your triggers. What drives you crazy? I can tell you one of them. A lot of times when we feel that we're thwarted, when somebody's getting in the way of us achieving our goals, that can drive people crazy. Knowing when that clicks on for you so you can manage it, because when we feel thwarted or when our values are trod upon and we react, when we react without emotional self-control, we're not only usually harming ourselves, we are harming the environment, because it's scary when managers lose their cool. It's really scary to people. It's very primal, you know, when somebody we rely on loses it. Even if it's in a quiet way, some of us lose it by freezing up. Some of us lose it by closing the door, you know. Some of us lose it and we yell or speak sharply to people, whatever it is for you. And we all do these things. If we do it habitually and routinely without managing ourselves, then people are going to shut down and shut you out. And that is for sure. And that's exactly the opposite of what we need when we're managing people. Positive outlook. You know, it's really easy to hang in the corner and doom and gloom and, you know, all that sort of thing. Crazy world, right? We've got lots of scary stuff happening on the national stages around the world and the international stage. No question about it. Turn on the news, whatever news you watch, you're going to get scary stuff. And, you know, we got to really watch out for that, because if we get drawn into the fear and anger place, we bring that to work. We definitely bring it to work, and it's tempting to get caught up in the negativity. Now, the crazy-making thing is, in a business like yours, the market's doing great, and your company's doing great. So you're like, yeah, it's great. No, it's horrible. Yeah, it's great. When's it going to crash? Right? And we're constantly thrown back and forth between those two poles, and that can be really difficult. And the human brain being what it is, and us liking to survive, it's easy to slide over to the negative, slide over to pessimism, and lose sight of our optimism. People do not follow pessimistic leaders. They protect themselves from those individuals. People follow folks who have a vision, people who see the future as bright, people who are not pie in the sky or overly idealistic, but who see the future as bright and see a way to overcome the challenges we will inevitably face. Those are the kind of people we follow. We want to follow those folks. And then finally, empathy. I talked earlier about reading people, being present with people. There are a lot of EI competencies, but those four, I think they're pretty important.